and Veneeth. I think we have a very exciting topic today to talk about, especially on the future of work, how the workforce is getting transformed with the help of technology, and as we look forward, a few years and maybe a decade out, how does some of that look like going forward? And that's what we would discuss today. So the way I've been thinking is, there are probably broadly 4 or 5 topics that we should touch upon, starting with, the impact of technology on the workforce and how it is transforming the workforce of the present and hence in the future. The second is around what, people are looking from work itself is changing, and, how does the future of work itself looks like, and that ties in very closely with, how do you look at the next iteration of skilling, upskilling the workforce to make them future ready. And then, of course, there is always a persistent discussion on, how is automation going to treat the workforce of the future? Is it everything going to be driven by AI? Where does the humans fit in the future of work? And then, if we can touch upon a little bit on, given the current global scenario, do we see an impact on Indian workforce from what we would probably calling a deceleration of globalization itself? So those are a few things that I think we can talk about on, given your vantage point, from the technology side, how do you see tech impacting the workforce today and going forward?
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everybody. So yeah, my reaction, my response to that question would be that 2020, when we were all hit with this, the first at first it was a reaction. I think all of us reacted in whatever ways we could, which meant that we did what we could with whatever we had. So whether if you went back to, most of us, wherever it possible, we went back to home and started working. I represent the healthcare industry with hospitals and across India and 6 other countries. So for us the front line obviously had no choice. They were in the hospitals. It's only the back office that went back home and started supporting this front line. And reaction meant that we were on our teams, we were on our solutions that were available on the cloud. And for anything that needed a remote access, because for that purpose, because that solution or tool was sitting on premise, there were tools like the VPNs, and which is the virtual private network, which was accessing, you used to access. So in simple words, we had to let access to these people to use tools to access the systems sitting on premise. So that was the first phase of reaction. This phase had very interesting times. This phase saw us working extended hours. This phase saw people not looking at what time of the day they were working, because one, there was an external environment that was very, very different. We were all responding to that pandemic. In our case, we are trying to ensure that our healthcare workers and people were supported as far as possible. So from all the other parameters subsequently, which we started discussing around productivity, etc., we were very, very highly productive, and times were very, very, very different. So this went on perhaps for about 6 to 8 months, and various technologies and tools came into existence by then. With this, and interestingly, most of these tools and solutions were always existing. There was nothing invented in 6 months, right? So most of these were existing, and everybody found a good use case when this scenario happened to us, right? So things like collaboration tools became more popular. Tools that are used for workflows became popular, because now there was nobody there to run around and chase a particular paper to be approved. It was workflow that you were depending on. Tools like Teams and Zoom and everything came into being more popular. So whether it is collaboration, whether it is working with teams, whether it is looking at work streams and various workflows as to whether the work is happening properly in time, everything was on tools. We obviously the most popular among them continue to be WhatsApps and the others, but which became extensively getting used to the extent that people like us, we were a bit the CIO's team and others were both concerned about data security and patient data, were a bit worried, but then
Mm-hmm.
we could do very less at that point of time. So that was the first phase. Then moved on. If I can talk about the second phase, to which we now then started looking at it was very obvious from the HR and the human resources front. They were people definitely called out, saying they were now getting burned out. The extra hours were now becoming difficult to maintain. The work-life balance became a discussion. People started finding their own hours to work, which is very interesting. I believe that we'll at some point of time discuss in this panel as to it's not necessary that when you work from home and remote work hours are need not be mirroring the work hours
Synchronous.
that you otherwise do. So these sometimes then bring in a lot of discussions around culture. I remember having conversations with senior leaders within my company where somebody said, "I'm not sure when my team is picking up the phone whether he's doing that from his bedroom or his dining table or he's doing it while sleeping." And my question was, how does it matter? Right? How does it matter if he's as long as he's responding? So some of these points came up. So again, because you asked specifically how did technology play a role, yes, technology continued to play a role and continues to play a role. The extent to which you depend on them, the extent to which you trust them is important. Before I let go, the last point that I want to call out is, while using technology, I think it's very important for all of us to understand technology is not going to do everything for us. It has to be combined with uh, clear policies around how do you use the tools, how are you expected to collaborate, because things came around. You have technologies to measure somebody's productivity. It's not going to really work. It's not about the keyboards that are getting entered each time every 5 minutes and the idle time really that defines productivity. The technology can be used to measure what a person is doing, but I believe the real tools should be more focused on measuring outcomes than the hours spent going forward.
Understood, Vineet. So Shrikant, if I can turn to you, and very different industry, all white collar people, 30,000 people, employees. How did the transition look for you, and what do you see going forward? Because there is, as we look forward, there is a big debate right now on, is hybrid going to be the future? Is it going to be largely remote? People don't want to come back to offices versus some people want to come back. That debate is raging, and in your part of the woods, I know that debate is fairly strong. So it'd be good to get your thoughts on how do you see, not only what happened but also going forward, how do you see this play out, especially for the knowledge workers.
Thanks. And thank you, Vineeth. I think I'll take off from where Vineeth kind of, alluded to. The reaction was more or less the same across every industry, whether it's technology, whether it's pharma, whether it's manufacturing, aerospace, and so on and so forth, which most of you are aware of. I normally put it the phases which Vineeth talked about in the famous 4 phases, which is norming, storming, forming, and performing. The initial phase was chaotic, a lot of confusion. What is this all about? And typically the reaction part, as Vineet talked about, was how do we cope with it? But I suppose the whole industry, at least the technology industry, has uniformly came out of it very, very strongly, as you all know by the results that you see. Thankfully, because we are in the technology services space, which is what we've been advocating to all the clients, saying that, hey, adapt yourself to the latest technologies, go cloud native, use AI ML. Data is the new oil, as we call it. So we were advocating technology, and the adaptation of technology became much faster in the post-COVID era, and it's continuing so in terms of many industries adapting to it. So we rode the wave of the technology curve, surely. But in our own industry, as you know, we went through these 4 phases of confusion, chaos, then, of course, storming. How do we going to really cope with this in the future, and so on, which is still continuing, by the way. Though there is some kind of settlement around how this thing is going to evolve in the future. And of course, the productivity, as Vineet pointed out, has been phenomenally high. But there have been compromises. There have been compromises, particularly on if technology surely could enable remote working and work from home kind of a situation that we're all in right now, it has brought in a little bit of a disruption in the corporate culture, which we'll talk about later in one of the topics, which is the great resignation going on. It has disrupted cultures where the loyalty factor, the organizational brand factor has become much lesser than the work content and autonomy and freedom for the individual taking predominance over this, right? So now this has brought us to the crossroads of what is the future going to look like. Clearly, everybody is settling around the fact that it is going to be a hybrid work. Okay, that is something that seems to be unanimous. Now, each company may look at hybrid work in a different way, but more or less the definition around it is kind of come to some kind of a conclusion that it's going to be part work, part work from home and part work from office, in whichever format you talk about it. In Mphasis, we've coined a term called work from anywhere, but collaborate in office. Because in our industry, collaboration is key. The innovation, the teamwork, sitting together and coming out with designs and design workshops and architecture and so on is a part of the work culture that we, even pre-COVID, used to kind of, advocate. So we got to have this kind of a duality where individual, where his output happens from home, but coming together in the teams at work at whatever space, whatever frequency, each company defines frequency very differently, has to continue. So in my view, in simple words, we have passed the trend of getting used to the COVID era of work culture, which is going to be what we call hybrid now in different forms, but it's going to stay and it'll have different flavors and different ways of doing things, but that's going to continue. That's broadly what my view is. Yep.
Understood. And Srikanth, just to add to that question, and please, Jags and Veneeth also add in. As we are looking to, for example, you all mentioned the organizational culture sort of becoming a little loose because people haven't interacted or haven't come together in teams as often over the last 2 years. A lot of people have joined the workforce in the 2 years, which haven't met each other frequently, and hence the organization fabric is sort of weakened a little bit. Is there also a trend that you see on people's expectation from what they are, what they want to get out of their jobs or careers is changing? Is the new generation looking for something else other than career growth and compensation, and maybe something broader?
So let me quote from a survey that we did recently. Not just my survey. There are a lot of surveys that many organizations are doing, and including Bain, which is helping us really kind of do some of these things. And there are broadly 3 things emerging. Number one is there's no question in my mind that psychologically, I'm using the word psychology for the ease of use. It's not necessarily psychiatric, but psychologically, there's been a little bit of dissonance post-COVID as to what is life all about? Let's put it that way, in a very large format. What are we doing? Is my career important? My job important? My family important? My life important? Is money important? These questions, particularly in the younger generation, I'm not saying the older generation is questioning it. I'm sure most of you question saying, what am I doing here? Am I here only for my career and make my money or make it up the corporate ladder? Or shall I bring in more purpose and meaning to my life? So purpose and meaning, or however you want to coin it, has taken a little more predominance, more so in the younger generation, including my own son and daughter talk about saying, hey, what am I doing? Is it meaningful? So that's taking more predominance. But having said that, they're smart enough or wise enough to know that it has to be balanced with a good monetary compensation. So balance of work life, purpose, and money, these 3 priorities are, they're juggling these 3, and they become right up there, very important for factors for people to really, to come to work or do work. Let's put it that way. As opposed to before, purpose and meaning has taken a much more predominant meaning in today's world. That's the bottom line.
So if I were to just come in there, so I echo what Srikanth said. Also, my view is that, interestingly, during this period, almost every board and every leadership had a digital transformation agenda, if they didn't have one. So they had some in some form or the other, but a lot of focus was brought into digital transformation. What that did was the demand for skilled technology workers went up. And who are these guys? These are the young folks who just come out of the market, who were at a particular market price, which they said that was their value, and they saw the value go up. Okay, the value was obviously up. When the demand is high, when the value is up, people are going to react that way. So which also happened. And it became, I've got various scenarios. I'm sure Shrikant and Jax would sort of come across. Interviews became very difficult. You would have guys coming to interviews with multiple offers in hand. The conversations are very different. So you could say it borders on not being very healthy, but at the same time, that's what it is. So so this young generation that comes to work are no more happy when they are being micromanaged. They want to be let go of to do their work on their own. So that brings in a lot of change in culture. If you happen to be a legacy organization with your mix of age group being a little towards what Shrikant called as old and senior, more people like me with a lot of gray hair, then you really have to balance it well. Because if you're expecting these guys to come and give you daily updates and give you come walk into reviews with minutes, you have lost it. It won't work. So you have to really change the way of working, and that again happened. And bring that again. There are a lot of stories around how difficult it is to get digital and technology folks into the team.
Yeah. Just to add to Srikanth and what Veneeth said, uh, what surprised us most was that could we do work from home? We all thought, coming to office was default, and, we could not do many things from home. That mindset completely changed. COVID changed that mindset. And then people also, as it, went through the months of COVID, people are also comfortable. The bosses became more comfortable with the workers. And it was always a thought of, if you are at right under my nose and under my eyes, I think you're working. Otherwise, you're not. If you're at home, you're probably not working. And that was the assumption earlier on. I think that kind of changed the paradigm completely. And it became such that, people were accepted even working from home. Of course, I mean, Srikanth talked about the downsides of it, but then just surprised us. Secondly, what also it was more profitable also for companies because they contain costs. So the question was, people started thinking whether my travel earlier was at all necessary. And, people, you need, most of our executives used to kind of run to and fro as though they had season tickets on planes. But then, the question when during COVID came up was said, is it at all necessary? Is it a travel which is necessary, urgent, whatever it is? But then all of a sudden travel came down to zero really. So those kind of questions are there really. And I know, I mean, from a HR viewpoint, you need to meet people, talk to them, and so on and so forth. The physical, affinity is much more important in many situations, including sales situations, etc. But then people somehow managed really well and delivered really. I think those were the surprises which came in along with COVID. And like what Srikanth mentioned, I think going forward, it looks like much more the hybrid work culture. And people became, I mean, I think of all, more importantly, it was like people started respecting each other for the work they do. The downside, of course, is, work was 24/7, absolutely. And you were expected to reply any time in the day. And that was an expectation. So it was a little, overbearing and, not required perhaps, but then became, I'm available 24-hour types. That was the kind of thing which came up really as a downside really. So I think that's what I thought I'd add really.
No, Jack, thanks for that. And maybe that sort of brings me to the next question. In the future, Shrikant and Jags and Veneeth, as hybrid becomes the new norm, two questions. One is, how do you see some of these, I would say, quote unquote, overbearing expectations going forward in the future, right? I mean, there needs to be boundaries between work and life. And those boundaries need to be respected by both sides, both employees as well as leadership. How do you see that playing forward in the hybrid world? And the second question would be, if I look at it from the many different industries, and at one end maybe a complete knowledge industry like IT services, another end might be very different if I look at infrastructure or manufacturing. How do you see the leadership teams of India Inc. Get used to the idea of people being remote, people doing things and being accountable for outcomes, and a lot less dependency on in person? I want to know this person is doing and micromanagement. Has the dust settled somewhere, or is it different answers for different industries?
Let me take a stab at that. A kind of show, I probably disagree with you. And then let me tell you, I'm no expert on hybrid work, and I personally believe there's a lot more evolution which is going to happen as we go forward, not only on technology, but on tools, on mindsets, on cultures, the way we work, Uberization of work, as what we talk about very popularly, where work will be contracted out from different locations. And I think there's a lot more coming, and none of us are, at least I don't profess to be an expert at it, but I'm able to see through there's a lot more coming. To your first question, that there has to be, you kind of said it very definitively, that there has to be a differentiation between work and personal life, or the way you put it as personal life, your family life, and so on and so forth. I personally think the lines are getting blurred. There was a famous time about 10 years, 15 years back in one MNC which I used to work. People used to question in town halls, how do we bring about work-life balance? That's a very popular, how do we, asking the question to a CEO or a CXO or HR heads and bosses here. And there were different answers. Everyone had a different answer. Nobody had a clear answer around it. But I think the best answer I found it is, hey, no company, nobody is going to define what work-life balance is. It's for you to strike that balance. It's for you to kind of take that personal and work and see where the balance lies. And I think that's getting blurred, and it's getting per force, like COVID forced us into many things, including technology, acceleration, and so on and so forth. There is going to be a definition around that. The differentiation is how each individual defines. In fact, you know it very well, and I think many of you agree. Many people are able to carve out workspaces in their homes. So that's my workspace, and this part of mine is home. So if that kind of a definitions are being happening, I think the lines are going to be blurred, and it's going to be very thin. That's number one. Number two, to your leadership question, I didn't fully get the question, though I thought, how's leadership adapting to the new ways of doing things? I think they've done a fabulous job. I think Veneeth and Jagan did talk about, that we adapted in the last 2 years, as you've noticed it right now, adapted to this very well. And as I said, it's evolving very well, how to really work with the remote workforce, how to monitor them, how to give them performance management feedback, how to measure their productivity, how to really bring them to collaborate, how to even remotely collaborate through various technologies, which are again evolving. It's not just Zoom. In Zoom, as you know, Shuvo, you can do design thinking workshops and take notes on the Zoom and share the notes immediately. There's a lot of record of all the chats that's happening, which is much better recording than what we used to do. And word to text, text to word, images to text, kind of artificial intelligence technologies which are coming in right now. Web 3.0, which is promising a lot for the new age ways of working. So there's a lot coming in. So this thing is, I think they're adapting it pretty well. My biggest question is, will we be able to bring in a new culture? What the culture is going to look like? It's $1 million question. Even I keep pondering a lot. What is this new work culture going to look like? The hybrid work culture, not the work per se, the work culture per se.
Got it. And like Srikanth, if you want to add, or on the work culture, that was probably where I was getting to next, because we all discussed that the organizational culture, the fabric has weakened a little. And how do you stitch it back together where it was, probably, because that's very important for organizations in the new world, right? Because it's not going to be the same. You won't have people 5 days in office anymore.
Sure, if I can come in, because just just take it from where again Srikanth left. A couple of things, right? So if you ask, yes, it has not settled. I think it's evolving still, because we're still trying to find ways. But the intent is clear. The intent is clear, and as long as the intent is fine at an organizational level, you'll find ways and means and tools to keep evolving and getting it right. So that's one thing. Second is, we are at the same time learning, because and that's what is evolving. So learning as to, at one time, I remember the initial phase was that, I think Jags mentioned, saying that let's cut down on all the office spaces. We don't need so many office spaces. Can we bring down the office spaces? Then we soon realized, no, office spaces are still required, because everything cannot be always online. You need place to collaborate and meet. Then we said, can we have what we call as hot seats, and we don't need to have dedicated seats? Then we said, no, we need to have hot seats. At the same time, you need to have meeting rooms, because there are times when people need to collaborate behind closed doors. So I'm sure these are all going to evolve. But one thing is for certain, like I think Srikanth mentioned, right? A lot of things that were otherwise said, no, it cannot happen online, have been completely understood. Yeah, it can actually happen online. In healthcare, there are many such scenarios where, I mean, there were the whole teleconsult. These tools and technology existed decades ago, but was always a fear as to whether a teleconsult is right for the patient, right for the clinician. But now teleconsult is pretty simple, pretty normal. But then yes, when the doors all open, when the lockdown was out, patients still want to come and meet the doctor. But there is a teleconsult option left for follow-ups and wherever an old age person does not want to step out of the home to view. So similarly, even in a work culture, there are a lot of these things that have now become acceptable, that's the positive part of it. So I believe, yes, there will always be these small nuances where, like, we joke saying, online doesn't mean available, because the moment you see a green tick, you are itching to say hi.
Yeah.
Can I speak to you now? Can I call you now?
Yeah.
That has to be slowly. Maybe you'll change your status for a while, and we'll soon get over it. But I guess, yeah. To coming back to what I started off saying, as long as the intent is right, we'll find ways.
Jags, anything from
Yeah,
your end
no,
to add there?
well, nothing much. I think between Srikanth, Vineeth have covered the whole gamut really. So all I would say is, when you said leadership, have they accepted this change? Obviously, because they themselves are in the same position really. So they have faced the same thing which every other employee has faced really, in terms of communication or travel or in terms of working from home. So, and they kind of personally experience the whole thing in terms of work as well as other than work. So therefore, I mean, it's for them kind of, they understand the whole situation much more because they are also this, wearing the same skin around. So that's kind of much more acceptable. So it was pretty much easy in terms of leadership, in terms of understanding. And I totally agree what Srikanth said. Of course, it all depends on each of us to define what is work, what is life, and what's the balance about it really. So I think if you are able to define it pretty well, and that becomes much more acceptable pretty much in the organization, and could blur the lines of, I mean, can I talk to you like what Vineeth said, in the middle of the night? So that those things, it's more by a little bit of personal culture and understanding, and that kind of comes about with your own personality.
There's one thing I would like to add, Shu, unless you're bringing to that. I mean, I know probably we're jumping the gun here, but
No,
there's a
that's
lot of
fine.
talk about
Please
culture.
add. Please add.
A
I
lot of
was
talk
just going
about
to come back to the same question on culture. How do you?
culture. Okay. Let me, this is my punt, and not necessarily, obviously not a messianic truth, or or it can be controversial. But I think
None of us
many
know that,
organizations.
Srikanth.
I'm sorry.
I'm saying none of us know that, so it's all
None
a
of you
fun.
know that. And you know me pretty well. So, so the point is, the one thing about culture is the employee value proposition, whatever that means to many people, has to be sharpened more, and it is going to be sharpened more, right? There was a time when I personally believe that there was a lot of companies do talk. I mean, they talk about their mission, values, principles, and so on and so forth. But invariably, often more than not, customers are probably played a slightly higher pedestal than employees. Typically, there's always a slightly different treatment to employees as compared to the customers. My guess is you got to treat your customers, your value prop is going to be the same to your customer. It has to be exactly the same to your employees. You cannot have a double speak there. If you're offering a value to your customer, you've got to offer value to your employee. You're going to have customer delight, you're going to have employee delight. It cannot talk two different value systems to different people. It could mean many things. I'm obviously talking at a very high level. I can give a lot of examples that we tend to have a different value system for a customer and we preach something else to the employees. No, that's not going to work. So your employee value prop has to very clearly factor in that the treatment you give to the customer has to be the same that you treat to the employee, whether it's your technology, your tools, your compensation, your whatever it is, your career paths, and so on and so forth. Fundamentally, employee delight and customer delight have to have same equal amount of weightage. That's my
Interesting thought. I mean, I don't know whether it needs to be equal, but obviously the employee value prop and employee delight needs to be something that each of the employers need to work on in the future a lot more. That's definitely clear given the way attrition has surged, and it's not only in tech, right, Vineeth and Srikanth. I think it's everywhere. It's not only the tech workforce which is leaving.
The value perceived. If the customer perceives you as a great value, the employees has to perceive the organization as great value. As simple as that. So equal means, I don't know what equal, can't quantify it into perfect measurement systems, but surely perception has to be seen as equal. Yeah.
I was just coming in there so that because we at Aster we have a tagline which says we will treat you well. Obviously, we will treat you well was for the patients. It was very, very clear. But this, as Srikanth rightly pointed out, it was very clearly called out that this we will treat you well stands for all our Asterians and employees. More importantly now than, and we have several programs which started off after the pandemic, which are around these. So whether it is to work a lot more for our nurses, because they were actually the front line had a lot of tough times. Employees, whether it was for the compensation and for the benefits if somebody passed away. So all of that has changed. There's a lot of work that's happening in this. So I agree with Srikanth when he says, yes, whatever we represent in terms of customer, we now do it for our employees as well. Yes, I mean, that doesn't mean that suddenly all the compensation will go up or the attritions will stop. That doesn't mean, but yeah, but then there is again, going back to that, there'll be a lot of clear intent and work towards.
Let me clarify. When I said compensation, I meant value. We do give value to the customer and price the customer for the value. So if an employee giving value, the differentiation, the high value employee, that's what I mean by compensation system, not necessarily pay more, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just had only one thing to add, really. Just what has happened post the COVID, and not post COVID, rather we're still in it, is employers are much more empathetic towards employees per se. I think there's been a massive shift in looking at employee welfare much more differently than whatever it was before, really. So that empathy factor as being more considerate in whatever it is, whether it's in salaries, whether it's in perks, whether it's in other things. I think the putting yourself in the employee's shoes and thinking about it, I think that is something which a lot of leaderships have started doing much more than ever.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I'll give you some statistics just to agreeing completely with Jags. Pre-COVID, we used to have an employee counseling service. Okay. The uptake for the counseling service through a third party, of course, we were not counselors. We didn't know how to do that, was 2%. Just yesterday, today, whatever, just a couple of days back, I got some data from my manager who does it. It's 70, close to 80% uptake in terms of employee counseling, whether it's psychological counseling, mental counseling, physical counseling, family counseling, health counseling, and so on and so forth. Huge uptake. So it was there, but the uptake from employees is really kind of not even quadruple, but 100 times more.
Yeah. So I think the single biggest fallout is in terms of depression, essentially on the mental side of things. The mental awareness, the government recently announced, even in the budget, to say there will be 24/7 helplines from the government side, so that there are telehealth consults happening from the government to say whatever is on mental health, kind of render help towards it. I think that has kind of increased quite a bit in terms of the awareness of mental health.
Right.
And Srikanth, Jags, you see that to be structural, right? It's not only an outcome of the current crisis that we're going through, but since it has changed, you would expect that 80% uptake on counseling to stay close to 80% in the future as well. It's not going to come down, go back to where it was, is what I'm asking.
Well, I mean, your guess is as good as mine, but may have to disagree with you. It's a very psychological thing. You're a typical, particularly a millennial at the age of 20, 25, sure, you must be the same age even now, but we are not.
I am also not, unfortunately, but
at that age, we all thought we were immortals. I mean, nothing could happen to us. I never even thought of insurance. I used to do all kinds of things which were like, probably will kill you now at this age if you do that things. The point is, human tendency comes back to the same thing. When everything normalizes, when everything is tickety-boo, things are absolutely smooth, I do suspect, something which is like mortality. That's what it's all about. Wellness is about me, myself, my health, and insurance, for example. I'm sure nobody in the insurance industry here. I have some data that it's gone up, must have, whether it's quadrupled or doubled, I'm not too sure. tendency to balance out is there. So I suspect it's not going to be 80%. Everything is normal. It may come down, but surely not 2%. So somewhere in between. That's
Okay.
I do agree with Srikanth. I think it will be best left to specialized institutions who deal with this, and employers, of course, will have to direct them to these specialized institutions. Of course, to that extent, it will go a drop down in terms of attention as things normalize here, like anything else does.
Great. So let's switch gears a little and maybe look towards, like, in the future, as we talk more of automation coming in, more digital tools at people's disposal. There is always a sort of fear, and this has been predicted multiple times in the past, saying, oh yeah, this particular technology is going to eat away or change your job, and then you have to get reskilled. So as we stand in like 2022, what sort of, like, what's your perception on the threat from pervasive AI or automation coming in and replacing some of the jobs, and if and when that happens, how do we sort of like retrain the workforce and upskill them to do something else which is more value adding than what they're doing today?
So let me answer this in a couple of parts. One, let's see what automation has happened over the last few years. In fact, I mean, it's not something which happened during COVID. It got accelerated during COVID as much. So as you know, of course, industrial revolutions keep happening every few years, but then it's been accelerated now with changes in technology, which has come to the fore really. Now, let me give you a couple of examples. If I think of when was the last time I went to a bank to do any personal work on a bank, I can't even remember. It's maybe 2-3 years that I've gone to a bank. Now, I'm going to rephrase that question one more time to say, when did I last go to an ATM? Now, once again here, the number of times I've gone to the ATM in the last year is far and few. I can say 2 or 3 times, not more than that, definitely. What's the reason? The reason has been, here is a wallet. And you don't require a wallet now. I think most of us don't use a wallet now because your cards or credit cards is redundant today. More or less, I'm telling you today, this is not there because you have your phone and that's your identity on anything for that matter. Any payment today has moved completely mobile, and that's what technology is brought about really. So the banks, you don't physically go there. You've not gone to the ATM as many times as you have done in the previous year. You're almost forgetting your wallet because you don't require it. You don't require cards of N numbers, etc. Yeah, including your driving license. Now people accept it on your mobile, so that's still okay. An image is still fine. So technology has been all pervasive. So it's been one, whatever we do normally, things which we do normally. For example, banking. For example, I mean, let me go one level down in terms of the lowest rung of society. So you go for your morning walk or morning run, and then you say, let me have a tender coconut nearby. And then that fellow has got stuck a Paytm QR code on one of his tender coconuts, and you go swipe them. Now, look at the adaptation of technology from the lowest level of people. I can give you another example. I was trekking in a remote place off Mysore, and when I went there, there was a temple at the top. I did not take my wallet. I forgot completely. I went there and I was hoping I had to make some offering. I didn't have money there. So the pujaari told me, you don't worry, I have ATM, you can transfer it. So it's incredible. And this is some remote place in Karnataka it's a village, absolutely. And you probably think there will be no signals around there, but there were, and I transferred money there. So one, technology is a given thing going forward. I think there is no two ways. Work around us has completely changed. Technology has changed every part of our life, whether you do your daily groceries or your cart vendor or you order food or medicines. I think they are at your doorsteps today, and that's a given. And going forward, it's whether it's going to be 10 minutes or 5 minutes. I think that's various proposals which keep coming in and keep improving various things. I mean, that technology is led to so much of competition that, it keeps happening by every year. So the speed at which technology changes is something which is a given today. The revolutions of the industrial revolution, which used to happen earlier to say, yes, oh, is machines replacing manpower, is gone to such an extent that in a blink of an eye, things have moved really. What COVID did was just said, let me accelerate it by another 2-3 years, whatever was going to come anyway. So if you look at it from the government side, what the government did in India, very smart really. They looked at Aadhaar, for instance. It revolutionized stuff really. The UPI revolutionized stuff quite a bit because it laid the backbone for various things, for information to flow everywhere, so that people work around it. I mean, to say there are a lot of apps, as you know, created around these things, and that will continue once again. And in the medical space, like where me and Veneeth are, pretty much what is happening, the National Digital Mission, which is much more focused on patient registers, getting the registry done for the patient's identity and diseases and so on and so forth. That's been fast tracked like anything. And believe me, that's going to happen absolutely, because the rate at which the concentration of the government is on that is phenomenal. And they've identified very many things to say how to kind of get things done. And as you know, Aadhaar has already given you your digital identity. People are using the digital identity already without us knowing that that's going to be the digital health card, so-called the health card, which is coming up. The big 16-digit Aadhaar number below that, there's a number which describes yourself, is going to be the medical identity card. So it's only that people are now trying to see how to kind of link it to various things, the registry, so that work around this happens. So if your question is there a threat of automation? It's already there and has fast tracked as much really, and it's real. So therefore, what we'll see going forward in the future is about automation, which will happen in intervals which are faster and faster as we go ahead, and people need to get adapted to it. So otherwise, as you know, I mean, classic issues in terms of losing jobs will happen. Now, what will happen to jobs is that people will lose jobs? Yes, pretty much yes. At every industrial revolution, people lost jobs, but then they found newer jobs. And that will once again get created, because there will be newer jobs where in some cases you may need to reskill or upskill, or in some other cases you will have to completely unlearn and relearn. And those are things which will be available to people as we go ahead. Of course, there are going to be jobless, but then it's going to be at an alarming rate, which I see if governments and people themselves don't get involved. Because to do a reskilling program of this mammoth nature, governments will have to take notice and start working towards it really more, to say how to kind of either reskill, upskill, or create the infrastructure for that. And that will happen. Whereas, once again, there is a set of things where here are these jobs which will completely disappear. You may no longer have a travel agency which is already gone to some extent. You may no longer have the clerks or the cashiers, etc., which you are already doing things online today. That's a complete thing which is just completely gone today. However, healthcare will survive that, because you need somebody personally attending to you. You need a nurse, you need a doctor, you need certain healthcare workers and so on. Whereas some parts will of course get automated, that will still be there. People involving social welfare, social jobs, obviously will remain. Security, defense in the government, that is something which will remain. But then a lot of these will get completely changed in a very, very different way, depending on technology. So to me, in sum and substance, threat of automation is there. It will increase. And unless and until governments and people take charge of their lives to say, yes, here is something we're trying to do to start reskilling the entire workforce, and that is something which will be quite chaotic. And this is what
Got it, Jack. Vineeth, Srikanth, it would be good to sort of like get your thoughts on if you see the reskilling movement, how much of that is going to be led by industry versus led by, policy slash government would be one of my next question.
Yeah. So I'll just add on to, because I think Jack's covered a great deal. I believe, yes, there'll be a lot of, to do a little more positive thing to it, is that there'll be a lot of which are very mundane, and which can be done with robots and process automations will happen. A lot of people, a lot of work that definitely needs human intervention and does well will continue to be there. And that's what I see. Like, so we would, like, he took the example of banking, I believe, in healthcare as well. You would now perhaps go to a doctor and meet him, where you definitely need to meet him and meet him in person. Otherwise, for everything else, you would rather do a teleconsult or place an order online and get the medicines delivered home, and so on. So there is this phase. There's, yeah, technology intervention. So, but there is one more aspect to this, which I thought it's important to call out. There are certain places where we are seeing technology intervention, which is very obvious. There is a lot of places where technology is already part of our life, which we don't even notice, because that's what we got into it. Because there are several places where technology is already part of our life, and that's become hygiene. So that hygiene part is going to go on increasing as the generation shifts. So when we say this, the automation and robotic interventions, they are talking about this. Not, we're not talking about those hygiene areas, right? For instance, the internet, the social media, the use of technology at home has all gone up. So whether it is automated switches, light switching on with a call to the Alexa, or a favorite music being played by Alexa, and the various other tools that we have. So I feel there's a big difference between how we are letting technology come into our life. In some cases, it's already into a part of your life, not even noticed it. Some places we're going to consciously bring it to your life because it's going to make your life better. These are the two different.
Yeah, I'll just add a slightly different dimension. I mean, yeah, absolutely, I agree with both of them. But I think one key thing, at least from my sector, again, I'm speaking from my sector point of view, technology and services, where evolution of skill sets and technology is rapid, incredibly rapid. 6 months down the line, what we talk today is not going to be there. But one thing that's happening with automation and technology is adjacencies are being created. So what I say is, it's not just about skilling, it's about smart skilling. Now, what is smart skilling? It's fundamentally ability to kind of do the job architecture, the career architecture, or create adjacencies of a certain skill. Example that he took was that of a doctor or a nurse. It's not going to be outdated. But then today you have an application where there'll be a lot of doctors who are there. I can just get them on a call and get at least my high-level treatment done. Another example that I can give is I stay very close to a toll gate, where the toll gate guy who used to manually collect money and do it. Now today there is an automatic gate which has a detector, and then the car goes through it. The same guy who used to collect the money is now a kind of a semi-skilled technologist. He knows how to repair the gate, or he knows how to repair the machine on which he prints the bills and so on and disburses them and so on. So the adjacencies will always be created with technology and automation. But how to create or curate training programs and skills based on the skill adjacencies or the career architecture, and able to not just curate, but personalize the skills based on the individual needs. The perfect example is a toll gate guy cannot become a driver. I'm just giving a wild example. He can become a toll gate repairer. So how do you map those skill sets in which the career journey of that toll gate guy happens, and creating the training programs and personalize or hyper-personalize the training program is the key to smartly skilling people. And to that extent, I think, and so I know you that very well, that in IT services, we have the job and career architectures, Java skill. What does it mean? What are the various adjacencies with that skill? And then having a platform which delivers like a Netflix of learning. It maps what Srikanth Karra's persona is, and says Srikanth Karra is an HR guy. No good teaching him Java or whatever it is. So for me, these are the skill sets which are my career progression. Therefore, feeding those skill sets to the platform and personalizing so that my persona develops is a smart skilling. So fundamentally, hyper-personalization, curation, and career architectures and based smart skilling is the way to go. Not generalized skilling. Anybody can do any program kind of thing. Doesn't work anymore. I think this is where there's a bang for the buck, if you may, on reskilling and upskilling, and therefore not just losing jobs, but creating skill adjacencies, like the tollgate example or the Pujari. I'm sure Jags, the Pujari guy, surely learned how to use a mobile and get that tip. He had to learn that, right? He was forced to learn.
Perfect. No, makes a lot of sense, Srikanth, and that probably will be led with a combination of, in the industry where the affected persona is losing the job, but a combination of that plus policies is what is going to in the future have to create a curated learning platform. In some industries, it's probably a little ahead, like we know in tech services, it's fairly ahead in terms of what needs to happen, but in others, it needs to get created. Great. I think we are almost at the end of the session, but I had one more question, and would be good to sort of get your thoughts as we are going through an unprecedented times. Given sort of what happened, has been happening not only in the, I would call it, world of geopolitics, with US and China sort of distancing itself. That's where it started, and then with the invasion of Ukraine. It seems like the world order is getting disrupted, and that means a little bit of deceleration in globalization, right? How does that impact, the future workforce, especially from an India standpoint? Does it have impacts, or do you think that it's a wild guess answer probably, but it would be good to get your thoughts.
You're turning corporate guys into politicians now, or political economists. That's the last thing anybody else can go ahead. I'll take a stab later, but I'll give. Yeah.
I think let me go first. Of course, we'll have to see this, maybe 1 year, 2 years, 3 years henceforth to look at it. It's more crystal ball gazing than anything else. So we've had two black swan events, which is COVID and still not complete. The war, the Ukraine war, which is another black swan event nobody expected, except perhaps US guessed it. But then what's happened is also a fallout of this in terms of very many things which we've seen. Key thing which affected businesses was the supply chain, which has been highlighted across. The second and more important thing, I don't know which perhaps is not talked about more now, is about the selfishness of each country really during the vaccine distribution and during production. So for example, I have the vaccine with me. I got it produced, of course, and that was a miracle. We got it within 1 year. However, people said there's huge amounts of money spent to acquire the vaccines for themselves. So we're talking about deglobalization. While we were kind of galloping on globalization with all kinds of software tools and so on, keeping us together and closer. The big thing which shifted out was, the divided nations. The rich and poor was absolutely evident. The selfish countries and the not so selfish countries were very clearly evident in what they did. Same thing is happening during this Ukraine war very clearly. What this has made is a little bit of, like what you said, deglobalization, where people have started thinking much more to say, how do I control this resource? Where do I get this pharma, API, which is only controlled by China today? So can I start my own? Now, these are things which are happening to try and protect their own, each country's people, their own resources or companies' resources and so on. Now, the context of looking at multinationals now is a big challenge really. So how do kind of multinational workforces across continents look at all those things? Because on the one hand, you have countries looking at much more selfishly towards themselves and their citizens, which could be rightfully so, but then you're not looking at perhaps one other angle from what I think is about cost. Are we cost efficient like what China is in terms of API manufacture in India? That could be a question, I don't know. But in terms of how it's affected the workforce, I think the other thing is, of course, one other thing, I missed out in terms of the government. The government is also thinking Atmanirbhar Bharat as a key example, because we want to do everything ourselves, be self-dependent and so on and so forth, really. However, from a workforce model, really, is the global multinational company, is it going to exist in this? Of course it will, with of course there's going to be deviations everywhere. Companies always found solutions. Maybe this is not the solution. There could be something else where solutions are there. So I think eventually business and therefore workforce will find some ways out of it. The good part is we have communication on our side, and really good faster communication, whether it's video, audio, and other accessories which are there. That's a good thing. But I also think what will happen is the workforce could be distributed, and typically a model which will come in with distributed workforce with certain aspects being dealt in certain countries and so on. So that could be something where things move on. But also, just to add only one other point, is what I also see is demand will move towards a skilled workforce. Clearly, it will move towards them, and that will not be, and it will be rather location agnostic. We don't care where, but then wherever there are skill sets, things will move towards them. The person, it will move towards that person, and that's what is, I think, will eventually determine what will happen.
Anything to add, Veneeth, Srikanth?
No, nothing to add there. I mean, we present across 6 countries with GCC and India. For now, I'm just concerned about these 6 countries and just trying to live with that for now.
Absolutely.
Nothing from me too, Shubha. It was more or less the last word which Jags talked about, what I was talking about, labor economics, demand and supply, labor and supply. I mean, in technology, in my industry, you know very well, again, the technology skills and the critical mass that we have in India is huge. If you're able to really capitalize on them, work will surely come here. As simple as that.
Absolutely. Perfect. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks.
It was a
Thanks,
great
Shubha.
art talking to you guys.
Thank
Great
you.
seeing you. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Nice meeting you, Jags.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.